by imagining, for example, how difficult it is for a very active 6-year-old, especially if they're male, to sit quietly and regulate themselves by the bell for 6 or 7 hours, when they first go to grade 1. And the fact that, Freud would say, if he was alive, that the reason that so many people have attention deficit disorder is because the demands of the superego, so to speak, in the school system are so excessive that the clash produces pathology. Now, the pathology is obviously defined by the situation. If you define pathology as being unable to sit down and pay attention to things that are deadly boring while you should be running around playing and having fun and wearing yourself to a frazzle, then that's pathology. That's attention deficit disorder. And you can treat it with Ritalin, but that's only because you can treat anybody with Ritalin, as I'm sure many of you know. So, Ritalin is an amphetamine, and it makes you focus more on whatever you happen to be focused on, though there's no real evidence that it provides any boost in academic achievement over any reasonable amount of time. But if you think about it that way, you see, you can understand what Freud meant by this superego versus ego conflict, or the superego ego-id conflict. Attention deficit disorder is a perfect example of that. And then the pathology is defined by the circumstance. If we didn't have schools that are like the schools we have, we wouldn't have attention deficit disorder as a pathology. Now, and people like to think about it as a scientific category. It's a disease, and a disease is like an objective entity. It's like, well, no, it's not a disease, and it's not an objective entity. It's a sociocultural construction. However, there are certain people who are going to be more prone to be diagnosed with it than others, and that would mostly be extroverted, open extroverted kids, because they're not going to sit down and shut up because they can't. They're extremely curious, and mostly what they want to do is talk to everyone and play. Now, Jack Panksepp actually, has done really interesting experiments with male rats, and he showed that if you deprive male juvenile rats of rough and tumble play, their prefrontal cortex doesn't mature, which is also a real hats off to Piaget's theory of play as critical for higher levels of development, and that you can also inhibit their tendency to play using Ritalin. So it's pretty sad. In fact, it's appalling, really. So, and I see people in my clinical practice fairly frequently who come in and said, well, they were diagnosed with ADHD when they were like 4 or whatever. It's like, great, pathetic. It's pathetic that that happens.